The poor are rich. The little are big. The weak are strong. The servant is the leader. And I know this because I travel this world on a regular basis. And I have the chance to see great acts of kindness done by very humble servants. I see enormous courage. I see astounding faith. And I know there's going to be great surprises in heaven when we discover who really were the heroes among us. Let me tell you a story about one such hero. During the great famine of Ethiopia, people were not only starving, but I witnessed the courage of the church of Ethiopia under great persecution from the communist government. The churches were seized, the doors were sealed, it became illegal to gather together for worship, illegal to be caught praying, illegal to open or even own the scriptures. The church was forced quickly and quietly underground. Pastors, evangelists were hunted down, publicly beaten, thrown into prisons. During those years, I met several times with the leaders of the church in Ethiopia very quietly in the dead of night. They needed to be encouraged. They needed to hear about the rest of us, what was going on in the world. It wasn't unusual for them to push a Bible, a hidden Bible, across the table to me and say, one day I was in the town of Sodu in southern Ethiopia, and I met a remarkable man of God, Tadessa Asay, a pastor who would not give up preaching the gospel. He enraged the communists. He had been beaten as many times as they knew how to beat him. He would not stop. His specialty, it seemed, was preaching at funerals, which was an illegal thing to do. And the communists knew where they could find him because he was always the one there at the funerals. And there were a lot of funerals in those days, as you might imagine. The communists finally had it with Tadessa, and they grabbed him and they threw him into prison. And he figured, as long as I'm in prison, I'm as low as I can go, so why stop now? And he preached the gospel to his fellow prisoners. And he drove them even more nuts, and they said, you know what, we've got to not only silence him, we've got to make an example of this man to silence everyone else who dares to follow this Jesus. And so they decided they were going to execute him. They were going to electrocute him in the public square of Sodo. They didn't have a chair officially for doing the electrocutions, and so they had to rig up something. And they came up with a crude device from insulators in a tree overhead, bare wires down. Tadessa had to reach his hand through the bare wires, reach around, and grab hold. And this pastor knelt in the public square while they did speeches to ridicule him and to advance communism. They gave this little pastor a moment to give himself back to God if that's what he wanted to do, and threw the switch. And psst, the fuses all across town blew out. The lights were gone, smoke everywhere, sparks everywhere, but there he was alive. So they picked him up and they marched him back to his cell, and they brought in the electricians and said, do this right. We're going to do it again tomorrow morning. All that night, Tadessa preached in the prison. What else could they do? Now he knew what his destiny was. I die and it's over. I go to heaven. He preached, and they marched him out the next morning having fixed everything. And they did the same routine, the speeches. They knelt this pastor down. They gave him a moment to give himself back to his God if they want. They threw the switch. The lights went out again everywhere. They unwired him, the smoke billowing. They said, just get out of here. We don't know what to do with people like you. I met Tadessa just hours after that. He was walking up this hill slowly and painfully where I was at the top. And when I met him, I said, Pastor Tadessa, I represent tens of thousands of American Christians who know your plight in Ethiopia right now, and we're praying for you. And he says, oh, thank you, Wess. And when you go back, please tell them that we're praying for them too. And I said, oh, I will. And he walked on, and I thought, wait a minute, what do you do when you just escaped death? And we called out to him and said, where are you going? And he says, oh, you don't want to know. And we said, yeah, we really do. Where are you going? And he said, we're on our way to preach at a funeral. Then go to church. And I said, yes, you're right, brother. That's true too. And he said, we had one copy of the scriptures in my church. Somebody found it, and I tore it up. And I said, really? You tore it up? And he said, I had to. I distributed the pages and my congregation memorized that book. We could not be caught with it. And so in the deep valleys in the middle of the night when I am preaching, I say, I need Isaiah 58. Who has Isaiah 58? And out of the darkness, Isaiah 58 stands up, and I hear God's word from the heart of one of my congregation. It says, but I'm told in America, even non-Christians have Bibles. A few years later, the communist regime fell, and the churches were returned back after 17 years to the church. And in spite of all of the deaths that had occurred, when they gathered together that first Sunday, to their surprise, there was not room for everybody. During the oppression, the church had grown fivefold. There was not room to get in. That was a very confused first Sunday back. Only God does that. The next Sunday, they had barely time to put up loudspeakers on the eaves of the churches because far more people were sitting on the hills outside the church than could get inside the church. And if you wanted to get inside the church for a seat, you had to get there 2 and 3 hours early. And the spontaneous worship as they shared what it was like to have gone through that overwhelmed them. And Ethiopia, because of the oppression, scattered across the Middle East. And now there are churches planted all across the Middle East. They are the channel into the Middle East where I maintain the rest of human history is going to be written. Revelation 7. After this